Look at Me is a scary true story about a teenage boy who has a creepy encounter one stormy night when his parents go out and leave him home alone. One evening, when I was in my junior year of high school, my mom and dad went out, leaving me home alone. I had a lot of homework to do, so I spent the whole evening sitting at the desk in my bedroom. My parents left the house around 6 p.m. While I was doing my homework, I put on my headphones and listened to loud music. There was a big storm that night and my desk was facing the window, so I could see the rain and the lightning outside. My parents got back around 11 p.m. When I saw their car drive up, I took off the headphones. As soon as my mom opened the front door and came inside, I heard her shout my name. "What on earth happened in here?" she demanded in an angry voice. Confused, I ran downstairs. My mom was standing in the hallway with a furious look on her face. She pointed at the floor and yelled, "Was this you?" I looked down and saw that the carpet was covered in muddy footprints. "I have no idea how those got there," I said. I spent the whole night at my desk, doing my homework. I watched as the look on her face changed from anger to confusion and then to fear. We both realized it at the same time. Someone else must have been in the house. We followed the trail of footprints, trying to make sense of the whole situation. They started at the back door, which we usually left unlocked. Then we noticed something else. The footprints started at the back door, but there was no trail of footprints leaving through the back door. All of a sudden, we hear something, a loud, pounding noise that echoed throughout house. Then, the sound of the front door being wrenched open and slammed shut again. Wham! We all ran into the garage and locked the door behind us. My mom took out her cell phone and called the police. "Please come quickly," she shouted. "Someone's in our house." After what seemed like hours, a patrol car arrived with 2 police officers, a male and a female. One officer stayed with us in the garage while his partner went through the house, searching it room by room. When she came back, the female officer told us that there was no one in the house and it was safe to go back in. As we were all breathing a sigh of relief, she asked, "Whose bedroom is upstairs on the left?" My parents looked at me. "It's mine," I told the officer. She asked us to follow her. As we walked through the house, we could see the trail of muddy footprints leading from the back door, through the living room, through the hallway, up the stairs, into my parents' bedroom and then towards my room. They stopped at my doorway. The female officer pointed at my door, which had been open the whole night. Scrawled on it, in black marker, was the following: 8:47 ICU. 8:53 You forgot to lock the back door. 8:59 You seem focused. 9:24 Turn around. 9:47 Look at me. 10:15 Look at me. 10:37 Look at me. 10:49 Look at me. For more than 2 hours, someone had been standing in my doorway, watching me. To this day, I still shudder to think what would have happened if I had turned around. Gone Fishing is a scary story about 2 boys who encounter a strange man down by the river in their small town. This morning, bright and early, my friend Oleg and I decided to go fishing. We live in a very small town and there is never much to do. We were dying of boredom. However, this morning, it was even more quiet than usual. The streets were empty and there was nobody around. The town was eerily quiet. We went down an overgrown path that led to the river. When we got there, we saw a strange figure in a dark green hood crouching on the riverbank. He was holding a fishing rod in his hand. "Good morning," I called out. "Are the fish biting today?" The man didn't answer. He just gave a hoarse laugh and started to sway slightly from side to side. I went closer and asked again, "Are the fish biting?" I took 2 more steps and then stopped in my tracks. The man began to sway faster and faster. I couldn't see his face because it was obscured by the hood. Just then, I saw something that horrified me. At his feet, there was a human hand, severed at the wrist. I felt a chill run down my spine and I started to back away. The man slowly turned his head to face me. I saw a pair of piercing red eyes and sharp dark yellow teeth. Instead of a nose, he just had two triangular holes. He stared directly at me and opened his mouth in a bloody grin. I turned and ran back to Oleg. Not knowing what I had seen, he looked at me in bewilderment. I glanced behind me. The man in the hood was standing up and coming towards us. Without waiting to see what would happen next, I grabbed Oleg by the hand and dragged him with me, shouting, "Run!" We rushed into the trees, looking back over our shoulders every 5 seconds to make sure the man wasn't following us. We sprinted through the undergrowth and made our way to the police station. On the way, I told Oleg in a trembling voice about the severed hand and the man's terrifying face. He was scared too. When we reached the police station, I pulled on the door handle, but it was locked. We both pounded on the glass, but there was no answer. "Listen, I'm going to see if I can get inside," I said. "You stay here and keep watch in case that crazy guy comes." Oleg was shaking and said, "But I'm scared. What am I going to do if I didn't let him finish." I ran around the corner and found an open window at the back of the building. I climbed up through it and found myself in the bathroom of the police station. When I opened the door, I peered out and saw a dark corridor. The light was flickering ominously. Summoning all my courage, I walked down the hallway and came to an office. The room was empty and there were papers and furniture strewn across the floor. The phone was broken into pieces and the desk had been overturned. Just then, I heard someone shouting. It was coming from the street and it sounded like Oleg. I was about to rush to the front door and let him in when I heard a rustling sound. Suddenly, another door in the corridor opened and I saw a figure lurking in the darkness. "Who's there?" I demanded. There was no response, but I saw two familiar red eyes peering at me from the darkness. I froze horror. For a moment, I was so petrified that I could not move. The figure emerged from the darkness and stepped into the dim, flickering light. It was the same face I had seen at the river, but he was wearing different clothes. It was a policeman's uniform. Suddenly, the man came towards me at lightning speed. He covered a distance of 3 meters in less than a second and grabbed me by the throat with his strong, bony hands. The man stuck out his black tongue, licking his lips and gnashing his crooked teeth. As I watched in horror, his face started shifting and changing right before my eyes. Without thinking, I reached out and grabbed the first thing I could find. It was a pen. I raised it above my head and with all my might, I drove it into the man's neck. Bright red blood gushed from the wound and the man let out a high-pitched screech. His grip loosened on my neck and I managed to break free. I rushed down the hallway and yanked open the first door I saw. Inside, there was a pile of human flesh and gnawed bones. The sight made my stomach turn and a wave of nausea overcame me. I fell to my knees and threw up on the ground. I was shaking with fear. I realized that this was the remains of the other policeman. Just then, I remembered Oleg. He was waiting for me outside. I ran to the front door and opened it. When I saw the familiar face of Oleg on the other side, I wanted to cry. "Is everything okay?" I asked. "I heard you shouting." Oleg nodded. "Everything is fine," he said. "I thought I saw someone moving around inside. Let's go home before that crazy guy comes back." We ran all the way home and when we reached Oleg's house, we found that his parents were not there. On the table, there was a note, "Gone to visit your grandmother. We'll be back late tonight." We went around the empty house, securing all the windows and locking all the doors. We were barricading ourselves inside. Oleg was surprisingly calm. My hands were shaking so much, I could barely hold anything. After we finished securing the house, I picked up the phone to try and get help, but there was no dial tone. We were cut off from the rest of the world. We sat down in the living room and turned on the TV. There was nothing on the news. Everything was going on as usual. Whatever was happening, it seemed to be just confined to our little town. I took out a pen and a sheet of paper and tried to write down exactly what happened to us. I don't know why, but somehow it made me feel better. If we don't make it through this, then at least someone will find this piece of paper and know what happened to us. Oleg is sitting beside me right now, but he is strangely pale. I asked him if he is okay, but he just shrugged his shoulders. Something is wrong. He got up and went to the toilet. He's in there now. All of a sudden, a wild fear seized me. Maybe it's just my paranoia going out of control. From head to toe looked at the pen in his hands. Cannot be flashed through my head. Trying to speak very loudly but calmly, I asked Oleg, by the way, where is your sister? Did she go with your parents? I heard his voice from the bathroom saying, probably. As the realization slowly sunk in, a cold wave of horror washed over me and I put my head in my hands. I wanted to cry. Oleg doesn't have a sister. In the uneasy silence, I can hear the bathroom door opening with an ominous creak. My evil twin. This started happening when I was 15. One weekend, my parents and I went to my grandma's house for dinner. My uncle was there too, and he was very angry with me. He claimed he had run into me the day before and he had a bone to pick with me. He said he was walking around downtown when he saw me with a group of teenagers, swearing at random people in the street. He said he walked up to me to tell me off and I started swearing at him. I told him it wasn't possible. I was a shy teenager and I would never have done something like that. Besides, I hadn't even been downtown the day before. My uncle insisted that he had seen me, and the more I denied it, the angrier he became. My parents and my grandma sided with him. They were all furious with me and refused to believe it was a case of mistaken identity. They almost had me convinced that I might have some kind of mental illness, like a split personality, and I didn't even know that I had done it. I let the whole thing go, but it really bothered me that I had been accused of something that I didn't do. A year later, it happened again. My mom came home from work and was very angry with me. She said her friend had been on a bus and she saw me sitting at the back of the bus, swearing at people. She came down to give me a piece of her mind, but I just started swearing at her. I tried to tell my mom it wasn't me, but she refused to believe it. The bus was one I would never even take. A few years later, it happened again. Another friend of my mother's had supposedly seen me in a park, swearing at people. She went up to me and told me off, but as usual, I swore at her too. I have never even been in that park. I really don't think that it was me. I'm convinced that it was my doppelganger. It freaks me out and I'm worried that someday, my evil double might do something really bad and I will be blamed for it. The Human Chair is a scary story about a strange person who carries out a very disturbing plan. Hello. What you are about to listen will shock you. I need to confess the strange and terrible crime I have committed and I can't bear to keep my secret any longer. I beg you not to stop listening. For years, I have hidden myself away from the world. You see, I am hideously ugly. Too ugly to describe. You would be shocked and horrified at the sight of my face. I was a miserable and wretched creature, because I never knew love. I never felt the affectionate touch of a hand or the warm feeling of a pair of lips brushing against mine. I was a carpenter by trade and I worked all day in a factory, making furniture. My specialty is making chairs. My skilled hands carved the wood, screwed the pieces together, fashioned the backrests and armrests and did the upholstery, patting the cushions and sewing the covers. As I worked, I felt like an artist creating a great masterpiece. When my chairs were finished, I would always test them out to make sure they were comfortable. It gave me a great thrill to imagine all the different people who would sit on the chair I created. Unlike me, they had wonderful, happy lives. They had someone they loved and who would love them back. Every time I thought of them, I felt nothing but misery and despair. One day, I was designing a new type of chair and, as I worked, a very strange idea began to take form in my mind. I changed the design and made a hollow space inside. It was a cavity large enough to fit a human body. Of course, I had to take out a lot of the wooden framework and the springs inside. The knees would be just below the seat, the head and upper body would be inside the backrest. Someone could sit inside the chair and no one would ever know they were there. I left a small space for supplies, like food and drinks, and I even included a little potty for pee and poo. By the time I was finished, the chair had become a miniature home. I stripped off my clothes and climbed inside the chair. Can you imagine how strange that felt? It was a tight fit, but I managed to get used to it after a while. I was in complete darkness, but I could hear what was going on around me. I heard my colleagues walking around the factory, looking for me. They had no idea that I was right under their noses. After a while, some delivery men loaded me into a truck and transported me to a furniture store. They put me on display in the middle of the shop floor and left me there. I was perfectly concealed and nobody was any the wiser. I was like a crab or a turtle, but instead of a shell, I had my chair. Almost as soon as I arrived, customers started testing out the chair. I can't tell you how many unknown bottoms sat down on me. Some of them had big, fat bottoms like a jellyfish, and others had thin, bony bottoms like a skeleton. Some had firm buttocks like a horse and others had chubby buttocks, bouncing up and down on me like a rubber ball. It was an amazing feeling. I could feel the warmth of their flesh through the material. Their shoulders rested against my chest and their arms and hands rested on mine. Not one of them suspected that the soft cushion they were sitting on was actually little old me. Previously, because of my grotesque and disturbing appearance, people had always recoiled at the sight of me, but now my skin was virtually touching theirs through a thin layer of cloth. Hidden inside the chair, I imagined myself hugging them, kissing them, and wrapping my arms around them in a passionate embrace. Of course, it was a strange sort of existence. After spending so long inside the chair, sitting in the same position, my muscles started to wither away. I could barely move and my body was crooked and bent. I was folded up like a contortionist, but I didn't care. All I could think about was the exquisite feeling of having people sit on me. One day, somebody bought my chair. The delivery men picked me up, put me in the back of a van, and brought me to the home of a nice family. They put me in their living room, facing the TV. Within days, every member of the family had sat on me at least once. I was in heaven. But there was one member of the family I loved more than all of the others. This person was very special to me, and, as time went on, I began to fall in love with them. I couldn't help myself. Whenever they sat down on me, I tried to make my knees as comfortable as possible for them. Whenever they leaned back on me, I would embrace them more warmly and make them nice and snug. When they felt tired, I would move my knees back and forth, gently rocking them to sleep. You may think I was mad, but I was madly in love with this person. I became obsessed with them and I longed for them to return my feelings. I reached the point where I felt that if only they knew I was there, they would fall in love with me too. The person loved to read, so I came up with a cunning plan. I wrote my story and submitted it to a website they frequented. By now, you've probably guessed who I am talking about. That's right. It is you. I have been in your home for so long, you've probably forgotten where I came from. Every night, I crawl out of the chair and sneak upstairs to watch you sleep. I can't bear to be away from you for a moment. I love you and I think you could love me too, if only you saw me. Now, after you finish reading this, please turn around and look at me. I'll be waiting. Don't be afraid. Come and sit down on my knees. I miss your took. Inviting the demons is a scary story about encounter with evil entities in this world. I grew up in a very strict religious household. As I got older, I began to struggle with my faith in God. When I was a teenager, I became fascinated with the occult. I came to the conclusion that the best way to prove to myself that God existed was to see if demons existed. I began collecting books about witchcraft and demonology. Looking back now, I realize how foolish I was. I didn't understand what I was getting myself into. I began reading these books and actively trying to invite demons into my life. I would read passages from the books out loud, reciting long strings of demonic names. I would draw satanic symbols on the walls and floor of my bedroom and try to cast summoning spells. The demons didn't come to me all of a sudden. They came gradually, insidiously working their way into my life. I hardly noticed it was happening until it was already too late. I started having horrible nightmares. I would wake up in the middle of the night and hear the sound of faint laughter or whispering. At first, I thought it was just my imagination. Then, things started getting more intense. Sometimes I would wake up paralyzed. Sometimes I would feel my bed moving. Sometimes I would find all my sheets lying on the floor. My personality began to change. I was tired all the time. I became angry and irritable. I was distant and withdrawn. My family started to notice all these changes in me, and my parents brought me to a psychologist, but he couldn't find anything wrong with me. Late one night, I was awoken by the full moon shining on my face. I felt very strange, as if the world was somehow disjointed and I was disconnected from it. I felt like I was floating in a vacuum. That's when I looked down and realized that my body was floating above the bed. All of a sudden, I felt something grab me by my feet and start violently shaking me like a rag doll. I was being whipped back and forth. I saw one side of the room and then the other flashing before my eyes. I was terrified. Something was trying to kill me or tear me away from the world. Eventually, whatever it was stopped shaking me and I felt myself being pressed up against the ceiling, as if it was trying to crush me. Then, suddenly, I was slammed down on the bed. I felt something heavy on my chest, pressing down on me. It was as if some invisible weight was pushing me down, and it was getting heavier and heavier. I was paralyzed and I couldn't catch my breath. I remember thinking that this is just a dream, there's no way any of this is happening. Then I heard a sound I will never forget as long as I live. I heard the sound of the bed creaking. I was sinking into the bed, and the sound of the bed warping under the increasing weight was real. This was really happening. In a frenzy of fear, I burst out of the bed and ran out of the room. I went to my mom's room and woke her up. I was wide-eyed with fear and hyperventilating. She eventually calmed me down and began asking questions. I told her what had happened, but she laughed it off and told me I could stay the night in her room. The next morning, I knew what I had to do. I went back to my room and gathered up all the occult books and materials. Then, I took them outside, dumped them in a metal garbage can and burned them. I cleaned all the symbols off my bedroom walls and I never slept in that room again. Nothing like that ever happened to me again. I think whatever demonic force it was had their one chance, but they failed, and they never bothered me again. So, do I believe in God now? I'm still not sure, but I do know that there are malicious, evil entities in this world, and if you invite them into your life, they will gladly come.